Okay, I'm going to call to order the November 14 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. First item on our agenda is roll call.
Commissioner Height. Commissioner Poland. Here. Commissioner Cernik.
Here.
Commissioner Goldberg. Here. Commissioner Flake. Commissioner Tetzlaff. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Okay, next are communications. Communications from Planning and Services Director Joni Marsh.
Chairman Shernick, no communications at the beginning of the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will give Commissioner Teta a few more minutes to possibly arrive. He said he would be here tonight, but if not, we do have some alternates in the audience. So we'll make that decision before we get further along. Next item on our agenda is public invited to be heard. If there is somebody in the public attending tonight who'd like to speak about something that is not on tonight's agenda, please come forward. Nobody has signed up for this, but if there's anybody who wants to come forward now, please do. Seeing no one, we'll close the public invited to be heard. Next is approval of our July 18, 2018 meeting minutes. Any discussion or comments? Any motions? Commissioner Poland.
I move that we approve the July 18th, 2018 meeting minutes.
Okay, Commissioner Goldberg. I'll second that. Seconded by Commissioner Goldberg. All those in favor who are at the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any recusals? Okay, it passes unanimously. Let's go ahead and seat an alternate. We have two alternates here. Do we know which order? Okay, I know that Commissioner Kohler arrived first, so if she is willing to serve, she can come on down. Thank you, Commissioner Kohler. Next on our agenda is Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council joint meeting. For the folks at home, if you haven't seen, we have our esteemed members of City Council sitting across from us. So thank you very much for spending another evening here in Chambers. And it's a staff presentation of the Main Street Corridor project with Principal Planner Erin Fosd.
Good evening, Commissioner Shernick, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and members of City Council. Really appreciate you coming tonight, and special thanks to City Council. I know you had a late night last night, so we promise we will not be here as late tonight. We're really excited to introduce the Main Street Corridor Plan to both groups, and thought it would be a great opportunity to do a joint meeting. For those of you who were here when we did Envision, we had a couple joint meetings, and we thought the discussion was really beneficial, so we thought we would introduce this plan as well. The Main Street Corridor Plan has been a long time in the works. We applied and received a grant from the Denver Regional Council of Governments to do an entire corridor-long study. It's taken us a little bit of time to negotiate the intergovernmental agreement and some of the particulars, but we're happy to announce that we've done that. RTD is administering the grant for us, and we've partnered with AECOM, and Lindsay Sousa, the project manager, is here to give an overview of the plan tonight. So we will be kind of providing a general overview of what we intend to do with the corridor study. We'll talk a little bit about the study area in general, introduce you to the character areas as well as goals for the corridor plan. We'll also be able to share some of the existing conditions and data. We've really just kicked off this planning effort about 2 months ago, so we've been spending a lot of time in the community just really introducing people to the fact that we're doing a plan, kind of what's behind it, what we'll be looking at, and we've been spending a lot of time gathering data and just looking at existing conditions. We've also been doing some surveying. We had our first public meeting last week. I know some of you were able to come, so thank you for that. And we'll be able to share some of the very preliminary results, although we're still really kind of combing through all the feedback that we got from folks at that meeting. We'll be happy to answer any questions that the commissioners or council have tonight. Lindsay and I will both be available. I do want to mention that we have a pretty diverse staff team looking at this planning effort, and you'll see why as we give an overview. We're really looking at a myriad of items, including land use, transportation, economic development, and redevelopment. And so we'll be able to hopefully answer your questions. If not, we'll have some additional staff experts that can follow up. So with that, I'd like to introduce Lindsay. She'll give you an overview, and we look forward to your discussion.
Great, thank you, Erin. We're excited to be here and to give you an overview of the plan as we've launched this just a few months ago and have such great community feedback thus far. There's a lot of excitement about the vision for this corridor, and so we want to get your feedback as well. So the origin of this plan, focusing on Main Street, really evolved through the Envision Longmont process, which identified one of 4 focus areas that needed some further emphasis moving forward, and one of those was Midtown and North Main. And so this process has evolved from Envision Longmont as well as other previous plans. And so within Envision Longmont, there was a focus around revitalization of North Main, thinking about mixed use, thinking about transportation improvements, and so we're advancing much of that. We're also tying into concurrent projects underway that will tie into Main. And one of those is the process underway led by RTD that's looking at the Highway 119 bus rapid transit project. So that would be bus rapid service between Boulder and Longmont, including stops along North Main. And so that process is currently underway, but what we want to do is recognize that there will be future station areas, that those station areas could be catalysts for activity, for development, potentially nodes of development along North Main, terminating at State Highway 66. So we'll stay in tune with that process, with that team, as we go through this plan. We're also building upon other previous plans. One of them is the Downtown Longmont plan completed in 2017, as well as the previous parking and an access study, and then the multimodal plan that was recently completed. There were east-west, for example, corridors that were identified as potential bicycle and pedestrian connections that cross Main, and so we want to make sure that we bring in those recommendations into that process, into this process, and really build upon those recommendations. So why are we doing this plan? I think what's really fantastic about this plan is that we're looking at the entire stretch of Main from State Highway 66 to Plateau Road to the south. And so it's really a lengthy stretch of corridor, which has really different identities within that stretch. And so we've been studying each part and piece and thinking about the overall vision of Main, as well as how we organize this into logical sub-areas, essentially, or what we're calling character areas. And so we're focusing on this vision, identifying areas of strength and stability, and also potentially areas of change, and looking to develop a cohesive plan. It's unlikely that change would happen in the immediate term. We're looking at this as a 20-year vision for the corridor, and what we're looking to do as we move from this existing conditions phase, as Erin explained, into this next phase of recommendations, is we're looking at some catalyst areas of future growth and development over time, recognizing that the corridor, will evolve slowly. So this is the process that we're working through, beginning with character area definition, gathering all the previous plans and data, bringing together the lens of not just transportation, not just land use, not just the market, bringing all 3 of those together. And then next, we're going to launch into the identification of recommendations for catalyst areas and alternatives within that to get to really one preferred plan for the corridor. A big emphasis in our process is on implementation. We wanted to develop both short-term and long-term implementation strategies that will evolve from this plan, and also give you a sense of phasing and funding strategies within that. And we heard that from the public last week. I will say that they want a sense for what the implementation strategy is over time as we move beyond planning of Main. So as we work through this process, we're building upon the past identity of Main and how it has evolved over time. and also assessing the existing conditions today. We're evaluating the current land use. We've studied the zoning that the city has put into place, recognizing that most of the corridor is zoned mixed use. There's also the designation for downtown of mixed-use downtown, and that we're allowed up to building heights of 4 stories or even higher in certain cases. So that's part of what we're analyzing today. Also, parks and open space. So the graphic to the right shows the entire corridor, and we put bubbles or circles around a 5-minute walk around existing parks and recreation areas. And what we've learned in that, by doing that, is that that northern stretch of Maine, north of the cemetery, is really lacking in walkable spaces, public spaces, and parks and open spaces for the public. And so that's some feedback we also heard last week, and we'll stay tuned, dig into that further into this next phase, as we move into this next phase. We're also evaluating character and community facilities. Again, that north stretch of Maine, the icons represent community facilities in the heart of Maine, or heart of downtown, but then when you move north, there's really kind of a lack of a there, so to speak, in terms of community facilities or amenities or destinations. Go ahead. I think that defines in some ways some of the existing older signage, but this is just a snapshot of existing photos. So what we've done is evaluated the full corridor to understand whether there may be character areas, and these are not necessarily going to be the way that we define recommendations moving forward. It's just a way to group areas that have similar characteristics today. So this listing shows you those 4 character areas that we've defined, and I'll walk through some of the market analysis here in just a minute that is kind of organized by those character areas. I want to point out that in terms of overall demographics, Longmont is anticipated to grow by 20,000 new residents by the year 2035. That includes 8,600 new households. This is economic statistics that have been gathered by our team member, EPS, who has been incorporated in Envision Longmont and other planning studies in Longmont, so has studied Longmont for many years. And so the question is, how do we address that new growth? Is Maine a place that could become, that could absorb some of that new growth in terms of residential and mixed use? So it's a question that we're asking as part of this process. We're also evaluating housing trends as well. And the chart here shows that since the year 2000, you obviously had a decline in new housing with the recession in 2008, kind of that middle drop there. But over time, the proportion of non-single family housing has actually increased in relation to single family. So the light blue lines, as you move closer to 2018, actually represent non-single family detached housing. So recognizing that multifamily is likely to continue to grow as a housing type, and where that may make sense in and around Maine. We also are evaluating the demographics in and around the corridor. Corridors themselves are really defined by the population that lives in and around them. So evaluating percent of residents of Hispanic origin through census data, as well as percent of potentially Hispanic-owned businesses along the corridor, of which we have many, and recognizing that all of that shapes the character of Maine today. In addition, aging populations, so this is the stretch of North Maine up to Highway 66. Aging populations indicate that we need to accommodate or need to consider how folks are crossing Maine, how they're accessing Maine, whether the connections are safe and intuitive, and so all of those considerations need to be part of our process. So market conditions I'll walk through with each character area just to assess at a big picture, what's happening with the existing market. And again, this is data that we've been collecting as part of this process. But the question is, should the current economic role of Maine change over time? What's the future identity of Maine as we move forward? So Character Area 1 in the northernmost stretch from Highway 66 to 17th is really a place of community retail today. And we have a growing presence of multifamily units, as we've seen. We have existing large amounts of retail space with low vacancy rates, but really limited in the amount of office space on the northernmost stretch of Maine. And we want to evaluate whether there is a logical mix of uses that maybe we're kind of missing today. Are we too dependent on that retail to the north? Character Area 2, as we move further south, is from 17th to 11th. This is smaller neighborhood serving retail, smaller businesses. There's low vacancy rates for existing space, but lower than average rental rates. Character Area 3 encompasses the physical boundaries of downtown, but takes us down to St. Vrain Creek. And so within that area, that's really the community and cultural destination or hub of Longmont as a whole. Strong retail and commercial activity, limited vacancy, and also we're seeing more mixed use buildings such as Roosevelt being considered or under construction in this area. Character Area 4 is from St. Vrain all the way down to Plateau Road, which really has quite a mix of uses in terms of kind of auto-oriented auto dealerships and that sort of thing, but also Harvest Junction and other single-family neighborhoods in this stretch. So part of this effort as we look at the south stretch of Maine is how do we improve safety of Maine itself, and then how do we knit together all of these uses to the south with Maine as that kind of common identity through there. And so what we've done in the past couple of months, we have formed a technical advisory committee of different agencies and organizations that are providing input into this process. So we've developed together goals for the corridor, and I just want to walk through some of these. So one is to embrace the historic significance of really this corridor being the spine of Longmont, the heart of Longmont, and always has been the historic Main Street. And so how do we continue to recognize that identity moving forward and embrace it, whether it's through signage or other gateway features or a number of strategies through which we can recognize the full significance of Maine. Strategic infill, recognizing that there may be underutilized properties today and taking a look at the market moving forward to say, is there opportunity to bring in some new housing and community facilities and even open space, parks, plazas, that sort of thing. Strengthening the economic base is crucial. Again, similar to what I mentioned with bringing in a diverse range of businesses and housing, and recognizing that we have healthy businesses today and we want to embrace those and avoid displacement. And then integrating Maine. Certain sections of Maine today really kind of turn their backs on the neighborhoods to the east and west. And so when we say integrate Maine, that really means providing greater connectivity and a stronger relationship between east and west neighborhoods with Maine itself. Improving safety and mobility. We have a transportation traffic engineers on board within our company that are evaluating the traffic volumes along Maine, the speeds, all of the data to kind of assess the conditions of Maine today and where we can consider potentially some safety improvements and take a look at the cross-section itself to say, are the sidewalks connected? Are the sidewalks sufficient width? And some of those big picture questions. So that's safety and mobility. Thinking about bicyclists, if they're not on Maine, if they're not intended to be along Maine, do we have sufficient parallel north-south connections for bicyclists that are sufficient? Transit is a catalyst. I mentioned the coming of bus rapid transit, also recognizing that we have local bus service along Maine today. So making sure that transit is incorporated as a safe mode along Maine. And then creating a sense of place throughout the corridor, creating destinations and identities as you move along Maine. What is the experience as you travel down Maine? And that was a piece of feedback we received last week. It was interesting with the public meeting is, folks said, I'm not quite sure when I'm entering Maine from the north and the south. I'm not sure when I'm entering downtown Longmont. And so signage or other improvements that we can make to enhance that experience. So I want to walk through the public outreach process that we're working through. Public workshops, I'll recap the first one we had last week. I mentioned the Technical Advisory Committee. We'll also go out into the community and have a presence at your local major events so that we can continue to get feedback. We have a web page within Longmont's website devoted to this project. And then something we've been finding really successful, we've had over 600 surveys responses thus far as an online survey, bilingual survey linked through the website that's asking some big picture questions related to existing conditions in terms of what do you love about Maine? What does Maine need moving forward in terms of uses? What are your transportation needs along Maine? And so that's given us some great feedback, and we'll plan to report out on the survey results as we move along, and also potentially update the survey with new questions as we move through the process and get more definition. We're developing bilingual fact sheets. Prior to the public workshop last week, our team went door to door to businesses along Maine and explained the project and encouraged folks to get involved, and so we'll continue to do that. And then obviously social media updates and news articles and such. So trying a diverse set of methods. The sign-in sheet last week from the open house, we asked, how did you hear about the meeting? And the response was a lot of different means. So that tells me that we're successfully getting the word out through multiple channels. 90 folks in attendance at our public workshop. We did an interesting format where we had a presentation and then we broke out into breakout groups organized by character area so that we could dive deep with smaller groups and get feedback on the opportunities and challenges for each of those 4 character areas. And as I mentioned, 600 surveys received thus far, and we're continuing to work through the feedback we've received. So this is a snapshot. We had some boards within the meeting and had folks place sticky notes on different boards to give us some specific feedback. So I'll just walk through these quickly here. In terms of parks and open space, we heard some about the alleys on the east side of Maine, that there may be kind of disconnected alley spaces as you move up and down Maine, that maybe we could do more with our alleys. We have a need for more parks in general. This term pocket parks on the north and south ends of Maine. Something I hadn't heard before, but I've heard of safe routes to school, but safe routes to parks was, I think, a really key point. And then the need for bike lanes, especially where we have disconnected north-south streets parallel to Maine on the north section of the corridor. In terms of character and community facilities, I had facilitated a breakout group that spoke a lot about how Highway 66 is a gateway to Rocky Mountain National Park, but you wouldn't necessarily know that when you're crossing Maine. And so that was a really interesting piece of feedback that we want to dive into further. So folks mentioned the need for potentially a boutique hotel, maybe outside of immediate downtown, less drive-throughs, auto dealers. Someone mentioned considering parking structures downtown. In terms of the land use board, we heard feedback around more local businesses, more mixed use type of land use, increasing the densities north of 17th. So similar to what I've mentioned thus far in terms of our assessment. Transportation challenges, need for alternatives, north-south routes to Maine, need for safer crosswalks, safe routes to schools. The high speeds, along Maine were really emphasized on the northernmost section, and then as we moved toward the south, toward Plateau Road. So we're taking a look at the speeds as part of this process. Some folks mentioned the need for potentially a smaller scale circulator bus, recognizing that bus rapid transit is coming, but that serves a certain set of riders that are moving to certain destinations. Could you also have a smaller scale circulator bus along Maine? noise issues on South Main, a need for ADA accessibility, which is a key component to sidewalk and crosswalk design, and then need for greater bus amenities. So someone went really specific here with same level boarding, ticket kiosks, bike carriers. So thinking about those bus components that are needed to create a better experience. So our schedule moving forward, so we're at that first November 7th here. We just had our first public workshop. We're wrapping up the existing conditions phase and now moving into this assessment of where those catalyst areas potentially may be for future growth and change along the corridor. As we move into the springtime, we'll formulate those into recommendations, go back out to the public. And then the last 3 or 4 months of the plan, this is a 1-year process total, is to really focus in on the implementation strategies, both short and long term, and communicate those as part of the final plan and to the community. So that's our process moving forward. So we're about month 3 of a 12-month process here. And I think that's all I had. This is the ways for folks to get involved in terms of we have a project-specific email. Call Erin for questions. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. So we have lots of means for involvement. So with that, we'll hand it over for questions.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Since we have 2 groups here, let's start with City Council. Open it up for questions or comments from you.
Tired?
Yeah. We may have to pass the microphone around, depending on. Yeah, Councilmember Christensen.
I thought this was a great presentation, and I really have thought for a very long time that we need to put the love on each end of Main Street. It's kind of sad each way, but I would like to see us seriously think about increasing the height of buildings along Main Street as we get downhill. I think that would be very useful for providing some needed office space and also for providing housing and various things. I don't know what our obsession is with a 4-story building, but we can get a lot more. As we move forward, we can get a lot more energy, I think, and variety if we include some 6-story, 10-story buildings down there. I also would like us, I'm eager to see the transit station. I'm voting for the parking structure. I would like to see us think about putting some bathrooms. If you expect people to walk along Main Street, it would be good to have bathrooms. If they can do it in Lindsborg, Kansas, we can do it here. People who are elderly, people who are pregnant, people who have small children, it's nice to have a bathroom if you expect it to be actually walkable. And I also would like to see us put some element of college or university somewhere along that corridor.
Thank you. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chairman Shernick. So the northernmost part of Maine has a lot of what I would call excess parking. There are a lot of businesses that at one point needed a lot of parking, but it doesn't seem like we need as much parking up there. Were there many comments about that as far as like maybe starting to reduce some of the very large parking lots and turn them into more pad sites and things with businesses that are actually more front-facing to Maine?
Yes, very much so. The character area that I facilitated, we had 2 tables for each character area. The residents really talked about how there is excess parking, as you mentioned, and it's not easy to walk down Main, and there's really no kind of organization to the uses. So that's a big piece that we want to look at moving forward.
Other comments or questions? Councilmember Waters.
Thank you, Chairman. Not substantive, it would be really helpful to know members of your technical advisory committee. And so if you could share those, it's not right now, but Erin or somebody, I'd appreciate that.
Okay.
Are there, as you do this planning, all of it which is exciting, and so I love the presentation. I'm sorry I missed last week. I was tied up doing council business somewhere else. But are there trends about which you are by which you're either encouraged or concerned along our Main Street corridor that ought to be considered in the planning process?
Well, I think what we have to evaluate, so much of this comes back to the market, and what I'm hearing across the board is that we're nearing the end of a development cycle. And so what concerns me is what's that pace of potential change or infill over time, and how do we make sure that if it does occur over a 20-year time frame, that the development's all part of one larger vision that really connects, with each other. I think that's my feeling.
Here's a trend that as I look at this and think, that's really exciting, and totally unrelated to your plan is, and this is going to sound a little goofy, but I think it's relevant. Is the increased homeless population that shows up on Main Street. And it seems to me this is not just for this project, but for everything we're doing in terms of planning and visioning for the future. And this is not your problem to solve, but ought to be in every one of our conversations, is what is our plan so that as we make this investment along Main Street, it is not sub-optimized because we haven't paid attention to trends that are real now and growing and predictable that we ought to have a plan for. So I'll be curious as this goes along, what's the plan for that trend in relationship to this vision?
Okay, thank you.
Other comments or thoughts from council members? Mayor Bagley.
That'll work. All right, great. I guess the only thing that I guess I would just say that I would be hesitant to grab on to the lamplighter in the old liquor store up north. Old signs don't necessarily make good development. And so I would argue, as someone who actually owns, my office is on 15th and Main, and I would just remind or just argue or beg or plead that the whole point is to rejuvenate and redevelop, brownfield that stuff. And yeah, those particular locations are rife with crime, and it's not downtown, so it doesn't just warm the heart like downtown does. The other thing is that comes to mind is I would just encourage planning and zoning and council and staff. I guess my opinion is just to reach out to those property owners who actually own the properties and ask what they would be interested in doing. Because I think, we can't just come in and just tell people what to do. My idea on suggesting the Main Street corridor was, hey, if we start talking with the property owners, then people will start thinking, hey, well, what could we do? And then synergy would occur, and then we could start doing, incentives or just chats or talks or whatever in order to just do with everywhere else along Main Street that Kimberly McKee and the LDDA have done downtown. And it just could be really cool.
Yeah, great.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem Christensen.
I do think that I appreciate what the mayor said, but I do think we have an amazingly quirky collection of businesses up and down Main Street on either ends, especially on the north end. And I have a great fondness for that, and I also don't want to see all of them eliminated, but it would be nice if there are some that it would probably be, if we want to refresh things, it would probably be nice if we could urge them to maybe move to other areas, but then we'd have to incentivize that. I don't want to see us trying to pressure people to leave who have been there for a very long time and are businesses and I may not go there to, say, the odd novelty gift shop on the north of Maine, but other people do. So I think we need to be careful about trying to make it homogeneous and trying to make small businesses feel very unwelcome.
One thing that I would add quickly, Councilmember Christensen and Mayor Bagley, is we did mail out notice to the property owner, so I think you're definitely hitting on one of the things that we've talked about is how important it is to really work with the property owners, residents, tenants, folks that are in the corridor now. We didn't talk about it a lot tonight, but one of the strategies, and as you read the goals, you'll kind of see this, is while we do want to encourage redevelopment and reinvestment, we also understand that Main Street's an important place now for businesses. I'm looking at Commissioner Flagg because I know she's done a lot of work in the Midtown area. And so we want to be sensitive to the displacement factor. And so as we look at strategies to kind of revitalize and redevelop, we also want to look at strategies for helping the existing businesses that are there. So that's something we're definitely looking at and will continue to look at kind of throughout the whole planning process.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you, Commissioner Shernick. In the public input form, I was just wondering, and this kind of harkens back to Mayor Pro Tem's comments as well as just what was said by Planner Fosd, that, and you also noted in your presentation, specific areas where there's a lot of, say, Hispanic Latino residents and whatnot in specific certain areas. Was there any comment about the worry about gentrification that has been a big worry that we've seen in some other communities?
So we heard a little bit of that last week, and we're very sensitive to that and want to make sure that, again, we're embracing, the residents that live along Main and the neighborhoods to the east and west, and also that there's just a diverse mix of business ownership as well. And so, as Erin mentioned, a big part of this is just kind of weaving in the current with future recommendations as we go along. So I didn't hear that term, gentrification per se, last week, but I know it's a concern across the board in communities, and we need to make sure that places remain affordable moving forward. I think that's a big piece of this. So.
I have a commissioner who's had her light on my little screen up here for a while. Commissioner Flagg.
Thank you. As I look over your project goals, one of the things that leaps out is you're creating a sense of place. And I'm wondering, are you looking, I know it's early days to figure out exactly what you're going to do for each area, but one of the things that has been coming forth in the planning arena is the use of trees, and the fact that more trees actually can create a sense of place, but it also adds shade, but it also can create an area where people can relax, even if it's a small wooded area. I'm not sure if there's an area along Main that could handle that. We do have the cemetery that is sort of a green space with trees, ironically enough. But I'm wondering, what are some of your early thoughts about creation of a sense of place?
Well, it's pretty fascinating to look at an aerial and, kind of evaluate the tree canopy today, because much of that is not just the number of trees, but the health of those trees, and also whether they are creating a canopy. And definitely downtown has that, but as you move farther north, we don't have as much of that in a consistent way. And I think all of these pieces there's multiple pieces that come together to create a sense of place and a nice pedestrian realm. And so we want to look at the landscaping, on the ground landscaping, the trees, the sidewalks, as I mentioned, and the buffer between street and sidewalk. So all of those components we're looking at as part of this process. But I agree with you. I think, it's someone mentioned last week, I think, too much concrete, to the north. And so that's a big part of this as well.
Commissioner Poland.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, I was there for the first part of the public workshop last week, and there were some comments from people based on past initiatives of the city where there was eliciting of public comment, and they felt that they were not listened to. There was no feedback, so I have two things. First of all, is there any plan to get some of these results back to the community so that they can understand, A, what's been discussed and kind of get a feeling that, yes, we've been heard? And the second thing, too, is I'm looking at this, and we had the public workshop in November. The next time that we have a public workshop is to confirm the recommendations. I'm just wondering if there are any other activities in between where we're actually targeting the public to, once again, get more feedback from the public on this. And I know we can't always have public workshops, but are there other events or other activities? I know you said that you're hoping to get into be at other activities that are happening, but are there any other targeted events that we're going out to the public for?
Well, Erin could help weigh in. We've started to brainstorm on some of the events, but I want to address the first part of your comment. So I mentioned the surveys, and that's been a lot of feedback collected in, and we distributed those surveys at the workshop last week and collected those. So what we want to do is synthesize all that feedback and let folks know what we heard from that. But then I'm also a big believer that if we have a workshop setting, what we need to do is first summarize, here's what we heard from you. And what the breakout groups helped do last week was create some ownership in the process, because folks were able to dive into detail in a way that a big workshop setting doesn't allow you to do. So we want to recap that hard copy map exercise we heard and pull that together to show how that led to a series of recommendations. And this next phase of the process, it's not as though we would go back to the public at the next workshop and say, here's our set in stone, plan. We anticipate that there will be options or variations or scenarios by which folks can weigh in on. So I just want to emphasize that this is evolving in that way. In terms of public settings where we would go back out and solicit feedback, we've talked about a December event. Could you remind?
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about that we've found particularly effective with community engagement kind of on many projects is that notion of kind of going to people where they already are. I think we're really happy with the turnout at last week's meeting. Lindsay mentioned we had about 90 folks there, which is pretty good. But I think we can do better. And so we're looking at, is there a way we could have a presence at Longmont Lights? Is there a way we could have a presence at some of the community events in the springtime? The other thing that we've been doing is kind of going and talking, kind of getting out on the circuit, doing presentations at established, be it merchants associations or realtors or other folks that are already meeting. So we'll be continuing to do that. And we can solicit input kind of from those established groups at those types of meetings. And then the other thing, while it's not necessarily a community meeting in the traditional sense, we've been finding it really effective to engage people on social media. And so we're definitely using Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Nextdoor to try to kind of communicate with people that way. And we may even be looking at piloting some digital engagement software with this project down the road, just because that's something we've talked about as a city. And so that might enable us to get some of that feedback in quick bites or from folks that are at home who might not have time to attend a meeting. And so we'll be kind of continuing to explore that. People are signing up. Daily we get new signups. So we're up to probably about 650 folks that have signed up to get project information. And so we're able to push information to people. So as Lindsay mentioned, if we do a follow-up survey, we can obviously share the results of what we've gotten so far, but also ask new questions and keep people engaged that way. So we'll kind of take that multi-pronged approach, and it won't necessarily be waiting until that next big public meeting, but certainly that'll be a key part of our strategy as well.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, this is a very exciting project. I look forward to watching that calendar progress. I think it's interesting that the first goal identified is kind of protecting the historical, kind of character, or I think the wording was embracing the historical significance of our downtown area. And I think that's something that the city has done really well over the years. I think all you have to do is look at, really the heart of our downtown and see this beautiful mix of new and cool and trendy restaurants while preserving this, kind of old town and historical feel to it. So I think this is not something I'm nervous about. This is something that I think that Longmont really has done well over the years. And I'm just curious to see, the part that sticks out the most to me is this idea of alternative or non-single family housing opportunities along this Main Street corridor. As your graph suggested, we're seeing a growth in that trend, and we're seeing our population grow significantly. I think that's going to be a real critical piece to this project. And I do think that we'll be turning to members of P&Z to be nimble on height, on height regulations, and see what we can do to help facilitate those opportunities down the road. So thanks.
Commissioner Kohler.
I had a comment on the community outreach. I think at the community meeting, I thought it was well attended. I was, happy to see that many people there, but it wasn't very diverse. So I think we might need to maybe focus some outreach, especially to the Hispanic communities and the businesses in that North Main section, to try to really find ways to reach them the best. And then I had a quick question for you on at the community meeting, was it mentioned about annexation at all? Some of the parcels that are still within Boulder County on the south side of Maine?
I did not hear that question. Did you, about annexation? I don't know that that was brought up at the workshop.
Do you anticipate that being, discussed at all in the plan?
Annexation to the south?
Commissioner Kohler, are you talking about some of the properties like around Ken Pratt in Maine?
Right.
Brian Schumacher from our office has taken some information back to City Council about some of the enclave annexations. I'm not entirely, council could probably answer where that is, or Joni probably, or Dawn. I'm not entirely certain. I don't know that we'll look at that as part of this effort, but certainly based on the direction that we've received as part of that separate work plan item, if there's something we need to roll in, we could certainly do that. But I think we'd be treating those properties as part of that character area and kind of looking at opportunities just as we do with a comp plan. Thinking about, even if you're not within the city, someday you probably would be, in what some of those opportunities might be. I don't recall it coming up at the public meeting, but it may very well could have, particularly if there's a property owner or something from that area, and Lindsay and I just may not have heard that.
Okay, thanks.
Mayor Bagley.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, or Mr. Chairman. Just council discussed this just a few weeks ago, and essentially, I think we all wanted to force them in. And then we thought, no, that's not quite fair. And then we thought, oh, well, what about targeting just a few to force them in, the ones that really bug us? And they're like, well, that doesn't really seem fair. And so the direction we wound up giving staff was, why don't you approach those individual annexations and talk to the owners about voluntarily coming into the city and then report back. And my understanding is that's on a to-do list for someone at the staff level. Is that about right? Brian and Don?
That sounds correct.
So, yeah, so awesome comment. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Commissioner Height.
Thank you. I appreciate the project. I appreciate the work that's going into it. I appreciate, too, the concern of having north and south caps on our main street. But I think the corridor that we're looking at is 5 miles long. There's 4 different zones that have been chosen. I might quibble about where you pick the zones, but you have to pick a zone somewhere. My observation would be this, that those zones are kind of unique. They are kind of different. And to keep away from homogenizing the whole 5 mile corridor is something that I think needs to be a goal that goes into this plan. In that regard, there was an observation that, the speed and pedestrian crossing on the north and south ends is a concern. The flip side is, it's a 5 mile long corridor, and transportation and moving vehicles through this town, as it gets bigger. Main Street is one of our bigger, more robust vehicle corridors, where walking as we walk downtown, which is, has speed breaks and is much more pedestrian friendly, isn't as big of a concern, at least in my observations, on the north and south ends. As we change things, maybe pedestrian issues become more prevalent, but right now, it's where vehicles are moving. That said, my personal interest is bicycle transportation, and there were a couple of identified connections going north and south. In a bigger macro scene, though, I think where our residents are and where we want to move people into downtown is connecting the east and west to this north-south corridor, which that has to be melded into your planning. Thanks.
Thank you. Could I go back and just address
Sure.
something with Commissioner Kohler? The first part of your comment was about the public meeting and diversity. And so you may have seen that we have team members that are fully bilingual, and we had headsets ready to go to real-time translate at the meeting. But we also went out, an English speaker and a Spanish speaker went out for those door-to-door conversations with businesses along the corridor and brought a bilingual fact sheet. And then the mailer that Erin mentioned that we sent to a whole study area around our corridor of businesses and residents was a bilingual mailer. So we're really recognizing this and trying to be very, very inclusive and encourage a process by which everyone can provide feedback comfortably. And so we'll keep working through that. So I just wanted to mention those strategies that we've undertaken.
Lindsay, I have a question for you. So at the start of your presentation, you mentioned other plans which you're looking at. So as you develop this and you determine certain things, will you then be informing those other plans, especially the ones that perhaps are not done or not set in stone? For example, I'm thinking that as redevelopment occurs along Main Street, of course, it'll get more expensive, maybe not gentrify per se, but it will probably become pricier. And some of that kind of funky, eclectic sort of businesses will have to find someplace else potentially. I could see them going, say, closer down to the St. Vrain along like Boston Avenue. And we have a plan that's in process for that. So how is your planning dovetailing, especially with like your market analysis, to our other plans?
So I think what we need to do is we're really assessing all of the recommendations and implementation strategies that came out of prior plans to say, how do we carry those through if they interrelate with Maine? When we, move through this 12-month planning process, there is development activity, for example, happening with South Main and other areas. There's the First and Main station. So we need to have a full sense of where those development projects are happening and how we can build upon those and plan for that future growth. So I think what we need to do is make sure it's an evolving process so that we have recommendations that can continue to be implemented over time, and we'll really be sensitive to that. And I think what the community told us last week is that they want to see some on-the-ground action. That's the message we heard, because there have been previous plans, like Envision Longmont, that really pointed out the need for this. So we want to be sure that we're showing a roadmap for implementation strategies, and whether that's integrated into, So in a nutshell, that's really where we're trying to go is get some of those low-hanging fruit, short-term implementation strategies, and then long-term as well. So Erin, I don't know if you want to build on any of that. Okay.
Okay, great, thank you. Does anybody have any other comments or? Seeing none. Lindsay, thank you very much. Erin, did you want to summarize anything to kind of wrap this up for us?
Sure.
Okay.
I will always talk. No. I would just thank you again for attending this joint meeting. We're going to have the current survey open through this weekend. So if you haven't had an opportunity to take it, I think we did provide the link. There are links on our website. So please consider taking the survey. And if you have folks that you think might be interested, that you work with, certainly encourage them to take the survey as well. The other thing that I would note, particularly for council, is, this project ties in really well, as we talked about at your retreat, with some of your work plan items. And so we'll be continuing to kind of follow your discussions. And if there's information that kind of comes from some of that, we can certainly weave that in as well. So again, thanks for your time. If you have questions, I think you all know where to find me. If you have ideas of other folks that we should be reaching out to, be it certain populations or individual businesses, what have you, please let me know, and I'm happy to follow up with them. Otherwise, we'll probably plan on giving you an update at a future phase in the process, either at one of your all regular meetings or another joint meeting. So thanks so much.
Okay, Mayor Bagley.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just wanted to say thank you to the commission, and thank you for having us. This was quite pleasant, and we appreciate the invitation. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming to our humble meeting. We're going to keep one of you captive, our council member Rodriguez, who serves as our liaison. But I think right now, because we have a little bit of resetting of tables and nameplates, we'll take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 8 o'clock.
On North Main Street. Hopefully some improvements. Not a big fan. All right, later, council. Thanks. I went in there once and I was just like, I'm never going back because the carpet. That's the issue. Hey, counselor. Gesundheit.
makes it look like a silly overreach.
Is it part of the bullpen? Well, I'm reading from a script, so I think I should be okay. You know, when I was in high school, whenever someone thought that I was reaching too high,
Okay, I'm going to reconvene our meeting. Thanks for everybody for resetting the stage during our break. Next item on our agenda is Victory Motors Conditional Use Site Plan Review, PZR 2018-12, with Planning Technician Ian Colby. Microphone. Yep. Nope. Yes. Nope. There you go.
Thank you, Commissioners. Before you tonight is the Victory Motors Conditional Use Site Plan at 1330 Main Street. Those submitted under the old code, the applicants have chosen to be reviewed under the new development code effective September 1st. So you will be using the new code in your review of this project. This has the main effect of eliminating the need for the identified variances during the initial submittal and instead converts them into components of a conditional use review. As an example, a vehicle sales use at this location would have violated our old code's specific requirement of a 250-foot buffer from a residentially zoned area. The new code instead requires that uses within that area be reviewed as a conditional use, requiring the applicant to demonstrate compatibility rather than justifying a variance. The question for the Commission tonight is whether the proposed conditional use is compatible with the surrounding area, given the proposed design. So longtime Longmont residents will probably remember this site as the old Hayek Chevrolet dealership. I enjoyed this photo found in the file because it was taken, pretty sure, on the year I was born. That conditional use lapsed when the previous property owner applied to change the established use as an event center in 2011. By the Longmont Code, Victory Motors must apply to reestablish the conditional use on the property, ensuring that the new vehicle sales use will not be a nuisance to the adjacent property owners. Even with the code changes, The existing state of the site would not meet this requirement for the conditional use, so changes to the site, along with the change of use, were required by staff as part of the review. The buffers are out of conformance with current code. The lights do not meet our full cutoff requirements and kind of encroach onto other properties. And the potential nuisances of the conditional use directly abut the residential use to the east. To meet the compatibility requirements, the applicant is proposing a number of improvements to the site. The primary improvement is a new full 20-foot landscape buffer and 8-foot privacy fence along Kimberg Street. The buffer and fence are meant to adequately mitigate potential nuisances from car engine noise, headlights, or other disturbances caused by the new use in proximity to the existing residences. Additional landscape buffers are provided on the north and south sides, allowing for continuity, sorry, that's a hard word, of landscaping within the adjacent properties. Exterior lighting that causes glare and trespass onto adjacent properties is being removed and replaced with full cutoff lighting in conformance with our code. And improved accessibility on the site will be provided for patrons who need it. These improvements are meant to reduce or eliminate existing nonconformities on the site and make Victory Motors a pleasant neighbor to the adjacent property owners. With the addition of a condition, the condition of preventing the parking of sales vehicles on the Kimbark Street right-of-way, staff believes these improvements will adequately mitigate the potential nuisances created by Victory Motors' use. Therefore, based on the findings of the review process, staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission approve PZR 2018-12B, approval with conditions. Staff believes that any negative effects of this new conditional use have been mitigated by the applicant, and the applicable common review criteria have been met. Should you have any questions, staff is available. The applicants are here, and let me know.
And will the applicants be making a presentation?
I believe so.
Let's roll right into that then.
Good evening, everybody. I am Edwin Mokke with Place Design, representing Victory Motors tonight. In support of what Ian had just presented and what was posted and staff recommendation, I would just like to summarize our compliance with Section 1502.055. Our main concern was not to be a nuisance to our neighbors, especially to the east where we have residential neighbors. In response to that, we have introduced this 20-foot landscape buffer with an additional privacy fence cladded in cedar. We have also introduced that landscape buffer of 5 feet to the north and to the south, and added a similar landscape buffer to the main street. These buffers all include trees except to the north to the south. We have also made it clear, and it's also in this PZR 2018-12B recommendation, that no for sale vehicles, nor vehicles to be for sale, would be parked on Kimbark or Kaufman, and will also not be parked on sidewalks and at driveways to the residential entries. Parking of these for sale vehicles will strictly be limited to the property itself. In addition to our compliance, we have multimodal approaches to our site. Sidewalks are spanning the east and west side in full length of the property, making it safe for pedestrians to circulate past and to the site. On Main Street, there will be no intrusion of for sale vehicles that are on display within the sidewalks because of this new buffer that was introduced. Vehicle access are from Main Street as well as Kimbark. Emergency access has a free flow through the site surrounding the building, as well as entering from Kimbark. Bicycle storage is at our main entrance side where our public parking is going to be, which also has van access for ADA. We are going to bring our lighting up to code minimum. At least they will be LED and full cutoff, and we will make sure that they do not spill the perimeter of our property. We have introduced areas on the entire site to soften up this display area, because we understand the nature of it being this hard. We are creating landscape buffers at the ends of parking areas within the site of these displayed vehicles, and we are also introducing landscape portions between some of those. This does give us a softness to the entire property, as well as adding some visual interest. Through the introduction of all the landscape, we are bringing irrigation to this property, and this irrigation will not overburden our current utilities as we have in this neighborhood. We believe we comply with all codes from 1502-055, and we do support staff's recommendation of 12B, and we hope your resolution finds the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Maka. Any questions for either Ian or our applicant at this time? Commissioner Flake.
Thank you. I think probably the developer of the site. I'm wondering, how will you secure the site after the business is closed in the evening and on weekends?
We have the owner present as well, but on the back side into Kimbark, we will have a gate that will be locked. The entire building itself is secured, but not from Main Street. We do not have a gate from Main Street.
Hi, my name is Josie Kahn, the owner of Victory Motors. At night, as we do with our other sites, we have gate blockers, which are vehicles that are pulled at the entrance to secure the site at night. You're welcome.
Commissioner Tetzloff.
My question is more for staff. As we are looking at reducing the impact to the area as much as possible with the entrance onto Kimbark, was it explored at all of possibly removing this entrance? Or they've mentioned there's a gate. Like, is that entrance going to be open during the day so people can basically, commercial traffic can come off of Kimbark there? Or is that more going to be like an emergency type access?
I believe it is mostly for emergency vehicles. We don't like drive-through traffic either, so we're going to keep it closed as often as possible.
Commissioner Height.
Thank you. Ian, I have a couple questions. In looking at the materials, it appeared to me that some of the bigger design considerations that you were contemplating involved. Apparently, there's a 9-foot landscape buffer that would have been required on Main Street. What would that look like, and what's there now? I can't really tell.
Sorry, apparently the laser pointer doesn't work. So right near the building, there's a black line that comes out. That's the 2-foot landscape buffer that surrounds the customer parking. The rest of it is display area. And so the 9-foot buffer would have come along on the planned south side of that. It essentially would have encapsulated those 9 spaces.
To the south side of the...
It's technically to the east. Sorry.
I'm confused.
Sorry, it's the east side of the site, towards the
east
bottom
side
of the page.
on Main Street, towards
Yeah.
Main Street, to the south. Or north and
Thank
south
you.
side?
Sorry. Yeah, let me show you. And then, there we go. Just make sure I'm doing it right. This one right here. And I'm highlighting things apparently, but that circle right there.
Is where the 9-foot buffer would have been required?
Yeah, because it's for every 10 spots, you need a landscape buffer that's equivalent to the width of the parking stalls. And so, because it was the 9 stalls, it would have been required, but we thought that was outside the scope of the redevelopment of the site.
I understand. And then the rest of the facility will be display area, but effectively kind of a vehicle parking lot.
Correct.
For which there are these, I guess, 2-foot landscape buffers, the L-shape units that I'm looking at on the plan?
That is, in the new code, it's beyond what our code requires because
Okay.
it's the display area, but that was Edwin's idea to kind of break up the asphalt that exists right now.
It seems nice, but what will that consist of? Just grass or trees or anything?
It was shrubs and prairie grasses, I believe.
One specific shrub is called the heavy metal, which is one of my favorite ones. But we have a variation of 2 types of shrubs that are going to be planted within these 2-foot
Okay.
areas.
And the water that's being brought into the site, is that for landscaping purposes as well? Yeah, I think you explained earlier, you're bringing water in.
We don't need it, but this helps us softening up this whole area.
Okay. And then I have one more final question, possibly for you, Mr. Khan, which is, in my experiences with neighbors' concerns with automobile sales facilities, is the loading and unloading of vehicles. Where are you going to be offloading your inventory?
98% of our inventory comes just by drivers. We don't have trucks that bring cars to us. We do have some trucks that pick up cars that go out of state. We usually just use the north lot there. We have also used Kaufman Street behind our other location. It's a nice big street, and it's convenient for a truck to pull in and out of.
Would you be using Kimbark, the actual street of Kimbark, to offload vehicles ever?
No.
You might use the Kimbark entryway, though, to bring trucks into your...
No, we would use Kaufman because it's a drive-through street. Kimbark's a dead end, so we use Kimbark very little.
On this site? I'm confused.
You're talking about delivery of vehicles?
Yeah, to this site.
They'd come in on Main Street.
Coming off of Main Street, not off of Kimbark.
Correct.
Not off this gate access way off of Kimbark.
Correct.
You bring them in off of Main Street.
Yes, sir.
That's the question I had and the answer I was hoping you had. Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Flake.
Thank you. I'm looking at the southeast corner of the project, and there's a garage there. I can't tell if you're going to access it from Kimbark, and help me to understand why that area is not also landscaped.
So that was actually a pre-existing use that had been approved by the planning department a number of years ago. It was a motor vehicle repair store that, when it was under the previous ownership, was a separate repair store. It's an existing site, and the driveway and access to that repair store is on Kimbark's side.
So is it going to continue in operation there with access from Kimbark as a separate entity to this?
You'd have to clarify if it was okay. Yes, it is a continuing separate entity on the site.
I guess I'm confused because there's not a line of demarcation showing the separateness of the site.
It's not a separate property. It was a separate use that was approved by
Okay.
another planner a couple years ago.
Ian, just one clarification. We are the deciding body on this tonight,
Correct.
right? Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, this is a public hearing item, and we have one person signed up to speak, but if there's anybody else in the audience who would like to speak on this item, you're more than welcome to do so. We have you come up to the podium, give your name and address for the record, and you get 5 minutes. 1 minute away from that, when the light turns yellow, you'll know you're on your last minute, and when it turns red, I'll cut you off. The person who is signed up is Sarah Levison.
Good evening. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Sarah Levison, 634 Emory Street. Full public disclosure, I'm also an alternate to this commission, and I'm not seated tonight. I would like to bring your attention to the Longmont Midtown Redevelopment Plan, which was accepted and presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission. The date on the report is December 13th, 2005. It was also presented to Council. And at some point around 2007 or 2008, I was the council member representative to the commission, as Councilmember Rodriguez is today, and there was a hearing on this same property, and the proposal was for a car wash from Breeze Through, which now has occupied a space on Ken Pratt. The remarkable thing that evening was that staff again recommended that use, And here is a Midtown redevelopment plan that was just accepted that talked about, and this is a direct quotation, that their vision was by 2015, the study area portion will be one of the community's premier shopping, business, and entertainment centers. 70% of businesses will be local or regional versus national, and there will be residential uses. And then it was a report that was a consulting group, Leland Consulting. The city paid a boatload of money for the study to be done, and staff has not referenced this study, which actually has also called out that the future uses should really consider both aesthetic and functional continuity of a higher and better use for this area. And at the time when the commission was considering the car wash, it was noted the incompatibility of having yet another auto-dependent use in this corridor where there was already an aspiration and a vision for new use, as we are seeing in the Main Street corridor plan. And at that time, Scott Dunn, Commissioner Dunn, who maybe some of you had served with, noted, even with staff's recommendation, how would change happen if you have another use which is just following along with the same auto-dependent uses. So that was the most persuasive argument that evening, and in fact, the bird in the hand, having a car wash, was turned down for the possible revitalization of this property. And in fact, a new owner came and bought it, and the Pacific Auction House was a thriving business that was relocated from a different area of the city. And even though they're closed now, going back to the same old use does not move this area forward. I would also like to submit Site 7 of that same redevelopment plan. The former Hayek Chevrolet economic analysis is looked at as a catalyst project. And I think that one of the other goals of our comprehensive plan is really to look forward to what would be a high and best use economically for a piece of property. So my request is that you turn down this application. Here is an economic analysis which, even though it's almost 14 years old at this point, shows the capacity for this property is enormous. I mean, the rental per square foot, they're looking at maybe $18 per square foot, and residential rental at $15 a square foot, which we know is laughable at this point in the current market. So here's the future that was seen in 2005, and the vision was by 2015, and frankly, we still have that vision today. And you know, here's another example of the public comment from last week where you get 114 business owners and property owners in 2005, and this has been put on a shelf. And so this is why people have less hope in this process. So I would submit these 2 pages, page 9, and I don't have it's a subsection, it's Site 7, for the committee to look at. So I would request these be put into evidence. Thank you. So my recommendation is turn this down.
Thank you, Ms. Levison. Is there anybody else in the audience who'd like to come forward? Seeing nobody, we will close the public hearing. We'll go back to discussion amongst the commission. Actually, I do have a question probably for our attorney, Dan Kramer. On the cover sheet of the drawing set for this, there's a note that note number 7 on the cover sheet: no parking of motor vehicles shall occur on landscaped area in the public right-of-way or in any area dedicated for pedestrian or bike throughways. This project is specifically on the east side of Main Street, and so I take it that this is referring to any of the right-of-ways that are adjacent to this particular property. But Mr. Maka, in his presentation, said that they would also limit their use of the right-of-ways, public right-of-ways, on Kaufman Street, which is adjacent to another property that they own on the west side of Main Street. Does our PZR tonight have any control over Kaufman Street?
Chair Shernick, Joni seems like maybe she has an answer to that question. I would need you to walk me through it step by step. I don't think I followed you all the way.
Oh, okay, all right. So, so the applicant has, Joni, do you want to jump in? Did you catch my drift at all? I did. Okay, all right.
Chairman Shernick, so I think what you're asking is because Victory Motors also has a for sale car lot on the west side of Main Street, which fronts Main Street but backs up to Kaufman, which is what the owner was referencing when he talked about the unloading. So Kaufman is a public street, and so if they're loading and unloading on that public street, certainly it's a city right-of-way. I would say we have had other situations with other dealerships, particularly ones that front Ken Pratt and back to Grand Avenue, where we've had the same situation where truck and car loading goes on a fairly regular basis. And there are some impacts to the neighbors. I don't know that on this plan set we contemplated restricting what's happening on the currently approved car lot in conjunction with this application, which is a separate application on the opposite side of the street.
Right.
I think
so
that's what you're asking, Dan, right?
Yeah. So basically, what I'm getting at is that, okay, so they have two properties, one on the west, one on the east. The application in front of us is only for the east. So can we make any condition or because the applicant actually brought it up that we would not interfere with the right-of-way on Kaufman Street? And I'm like, oh, so should we condition this PZR to reference Kaufman Street, but it's for a property that's not in front of us?
I could give you a quick answer, or I could give you an answer that references the actual new code, which I'm going to pull up. Because the basic concept with conditions is that you can apply them broadly, but it has to be connected to the application and the review criteria you're using to assess the application. Conditions of approval, 1502040N. One more moment, please. N1, the decision-making body may impose such conditions upon the subject development as are necessary to carry out the general purpose and intent of this development code. That would mean the development for which there is a proposal in front of you.
Right. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, so we're not going to make any condition about Kaufman Street because it's not tied to the development that's in front of us. Right. Okay, great. Any other comments, thoughts, questions, concerns? We've got our documents coming around. Don't everybody jump in at once. Commissioner Poland.
I do have a couple questions. The public has brought up the study from 2005, so I am wondering if we have any background information on that. Also in regards to the fact that the auction business that was in place, how long, what was the term for that? How long were they in existence? What years?
Chairman Chernak and Commissioner Poland, wow, you're really going to press my memory here, aren't you? So the plan that Sarah refers to is called the Midtown Plan, and that plan was done in 2003 and 4 and adopted by Council and Planning Commission. That plan, I would say, largely did not get implemented by the city. And so it is true that the application that she discussed, I was here that night, I remember that Planning Commission meeting many moons ago. And the commission did deny that car wash application. You know, since then, I think the Midtown Plan, as I said, has not been largely implemented. There are pieces of it that were implemented. And I think Erin referenced some of those earlier tonight when she referenced Commissioner Flagg's work and doing some work with the Midtown business owners back in the day when she was volunteering with us. So, so certainly that plan is there. I would say the new plan that we've talked about this evening really is looking to replace that plan as a current long-range planning document for the whole Main Street corridor. The Pacific Auction Center came in for approval, I want to say in 2007, 11. See, Ian's, as he mentioned earlier, a lot younger than me, so he can remember. So 2011, and they went out of business about 2 years ago. And I would also mention that this conditional use is before you. The current property owner I know bought this without perhaps all of the information being provided to him that he would need to go through this process. So he was actually a code case, and this would be, to get a conditional use would be the way to rectify use of that site for the business that code enforcement in effect had to give a notice of violation for. So there is a reason they end up back here for a conditional use before Planning Commission, with the auction house leaving and not moving forward and vacating that use. Interestingly, there was a secondary use with the auction house, which is the car repair business that Commissioner Flagg referenced. And so that's been around for a while as well. So we kind of had a multitude of things going on this property. And that's why we're here today.
Thank you.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Joni, the documentation brought before us by Ms. Levison, the Midtown Plan, says that it states a goal of 70% of businesses within the study area will be local or regional versus national. Do we have any way of knowing what the makeup of the study area is at this time? Have we hit that goal?
So Chairman Chernak and Commissioner Goldberg, so as I stated, the city has not implemented this plan or kept metrics or statistics on this plan. So off the top of my head, I would not be able to answer either of those questions.
Commissioner Flagg.
At the time that I actually did work for them and I actually got paid for it, I was happy to say, some of it. It seemed like most of the businesses along that area were locally owned. But a plan is a very rich document. It can point out and guide development if, in fact, the people who want to have businesses in the area are open to some of the plan's concepts and ideas. The reality is that if they couldn't make a go at the auction house, and I think at one point they had, they presented musicals there, they had dinners there, they did a lot of renting out of the space for different activities. It's an awkward spot because traffic does whiz by there pretty fast. It's an auto-based environment to a certain extent. You have car repair areas there, car repair parts stores and so on. And in Longmont, we can't discourage all kinds of different activities and uses that we might not want to live across the street from, because people do need to buy cars, and not all of them can afford something that's brand spanking new. And I know a lot of times we have the opinion that used car lots are not real attractive. So, and that's part of the issue, is they're not attractive, and perhaps we would not like to see them in our main street, but they have to go somewhere. And people who live in that area may have to walk to get to a car dealership, and having them out on 119 doesn't solve their problem unless we have good bus service. There are a multitude of issues that go into finally having a use that gets approved. And while, yes, a wonderful mixed use with a restaurant and housing and all the kinds of things that make for a nice walking environment would be wonderful along the Main Street area, the reality is that we do need other uses as well. It appears to me that the owner and the developer of this site are willing to landscape to the full extent and create a more attractive used car lot. That in itself could set a precedent for us. We can say, well, here's what we expect in used car lots from here on out. This is our standard, and if you can't make that, then, you know, maybe that's something we look for. I'm not saying we should turn the whole city over to used car lots. That would never be my choice, but it sounds like they've met the requirements that the planning office put before them. And as long as the site is in fact maintained, lighting, landscaping, cleanliness in that area, then I think that it can be a good business in that area. And maybe even have employment opportunities and certainly collect sales tax. We need some of that. There are some benefits to it, even though that may not have been our first choice of what should go there. So I guess I'm en route to saying, and I've got to find the right thing to express it here, is then, which one am I looking for? Josh, you're usually 2018 12B. I propose that we approve that PZ. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion to approve PZR 2018-12 B, which is the conditional approval on the floor. Commissioner Height.
Before that gets seconded, I have some more comments, if that's okay. Because I think I agree with Commissioner Flagg's observations that things have changed. In particular, we have re-envisioned Longmont, and as I understand the standard that we're looking at is whether or not, as a conditional use, in the approval that we're to, or the grounds of approval that we're to look at, we're basically striving for whether or not it's compatible with neighboring properties. And as Commissioner Flagg identified, there is a neighboring property that's an auto parts dealership who actually happened to comment. And Ian, my question for you is, so the Advanced Auto Sale, the Advanced Auto Store located next door, submitted a comment indicating that he calls it arterial class landscaping requirements that he believes his auto parts store meets, and is concerned that the Victory Motors site meets this standard as well. What's your sense?
Prior to the landscaping plan that you're seeing there, they would not be meeting their front setback requirement, but the proposed plan does include more landscaping that should match what's required in that zone.
So it's becoming more compatible. The pictures that we saw with 2 trees and some grass is being revamped pursuant to the landscape plan?
Correct.
that makes it more compatible with the neighboring property. Yeah, so with that, I will second the motion.
Okay, motion to approve PZR 2018-12B has been seconded by Commissioner Height. Commissioner Goldberg.
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to do is thank Ms. Levison for speaking today. I recognize that this town that we live in is rich and robust and vibrant because of those who sat in these chairs before us and made wise decisions and had great vision. And I don't take that for granted, and I know it's why I'm sitting here too. So it is with great hesitation or thought that I dare venture away from those who I respect the most. But I do think that Commissioner Flake summarized it better than I could, and so I'll just echo her sentiment, which is that I recognize there was a thoughtful and visionary plan in 2003, and for whatever reason it was not realized, and now the Longmont of 2018 may be different than what was visioned then. And the project presented before this project today, was really laying the groundwork for a new vision for this very same district and the same strip of land. So I do think that we as a town are starting to and beginning a new journey to create a vision for this stretch of our town, and I look forward to seeing that develop. But what we have before us is a project and an applicant who has met the burden in the eyes of the city. Per staff, the project is consistent with the comp plan, it complies with the applicable city standards, it's compatible with the surrounding area, and it will not adversely affect the surrounding properties, and has a sufficient and appropriate transportation plan, barring our condition. So it is with that I'm comforted in also supporting the motion on the table. And thank you.
Commissioner Poland.
Thank you. I will want to echo Josh's comments, and once again, thanks Sarah for bringing the prior report to our attention. But it has been noted here that we have also recently done the Envision Longmont, and also the first part of the meeting today where we did go through and talk about the new vision for that area, I believe supersedes the prior work done. I think we have taken a look at that and have been making some adjustments to that. As far as this current project, I am for it. Thank you, Josh, for stating all of those 5 points, so I don't have to state them. I do agree with the fact that the burden has been met by the applicant for that. I do appreciate the fact that the applicant has put in the buffer out behind it. For the people living on the other side of Kimbark, it will be a much better view having trees and the cedar fence than the chain link fence with the, I forget how they put it, for the two occasional trees that happen to just somehow grow there. So I think overall for that area, this is a better use than what it currently has. It does give opportunity for some jobs in the area, and it is moving the area forward with some development. And so for that, I will be in favor of it.
So I'll chime in here. The current use of it right now, if I understand correctly from Joni, is that it's vacant. It's been vacant for about 2 years. Putting it back to use is actually a benefit to the city. Is it Ms. Levison brings up the question of highest and best use, and that's something that a town to the southwest of us that'll go unnamed tends to disprove things or disapprove of projects until they get what they want and what they think they want. I struggle with that because to me that's an abridgment of somebody's property rights as well. just because it's not maybe the highest and best use that you see over the next 20 or 30 years, doesn't mean that it isn't an appropriate use now for the next 5 years maybe. To the question of that Ms. Levison said that Scott Dunn raised at that meeting back in 2005 or 2008, how will change occur? It's going to be driven by the property values. As the Roosevelt apartments have gone in, and then we incrementally get more development of a similar nature moving further and further north, eventually the owner of this property will not be able to pay his property tax simply by selling cars. He'll have to develop upward, and then it will change. I don't know how long that's going to take, but that's how it's going to change. So there is a way for it to change. But I don't think it's appropriate for us to quash somebody being able to use their property now, here and now, and especially when it's just sitting vacant, completely unused. Okay, so off the soapbox on that, I do just have one technical clarification that I'd like, okay? On the east side, just to make sure, because there's a lot going on with the drawing and the buffer, we have the street, the curb, the landscaping, and then the fence, correct?
Correct. That's a requirement of our code.
Okay, good. Yeah, that we're not putting a fence in front of all that landscaping. Okay. All right. Any other comments or questions? We have a motion in front of us, which is to approve PZR 2018-12B. Let's take a vote. Okay, that has passed unanimously. So this item now enters a 7-day appeal period. During this time, any aggrieved party may appeal the Commission's decision by submitting a written appeal letter stating why the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision should be amended or reversed by City Council. All appeals must be in writing and must be received in the City Clerk's office and the Planning Office within the 7-day appeal period. That period begins Thursday, November 15 at 8 a.m. and ends Wednesday, November 21 at 5 p.m. Ian, thank you for your presentation. Thank you to Mr. Maka and the applicant for coming tonight and presenting as well. We will move on with our agenda, which is a final call for the public invited to be heard. If there's anybody in the audience who'd like to come forward and speak, we'd love to hear from you. Ms. Levison?
So since I seem to be the historical voice tonight, I just want to give a shout out. The original vision for this whole Main Street corridor goes back to Doug Brown. Doug Brown in a city council retreat. I'm sorry, I'm such a nerd. I started going to retreats in 2004. And I remember that he talked about having a cohesive vision from basically Plateau Road all the way to Highway 66. So I just want to acknowledge, again, the work of past council members, and that was probably, we're talking almost maybe 15 years ago, that he had been thinking about this. So, when we look towards the future, it sometimes really takes iterations of ideas bubbling up, but there is a genesis of leadership in the community that sees that we could be doing this. So that's just my final comment, and I understand your point of view about the the decision, but I thought that since staff had not brought up that report, that fair enough that you guys should see in the content of it, and especially the ROI, you can see how dated the economic analysis is, that I would love to see, and I imagine we will see some updated economic strategies and analysis in the Main Street Corridor Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Levison. Any items from the commission? Commissioner Tetzlaff.
So I would just like to announce that tonight is actually my last meeting with you guys. I was recently offered the opportunity to become the city administrator for a city up in Minnesota. So in about 4 weeks, my wife and I will be loading up all our things and heading for the Great White North. Probably freezing our way through this first winter, but my time spent with you guys has been incredible. I love land use discussions, as nerdy as that may be, so I've enjoyed it and couldn't ask for better staff to work with, and I've enjoyed working with you guys as well. So thank you.
So, Josh, now that you mention it, first off, what's the town?
Dodge Center, Minnesota.
Oh, okay.
It is just outside of Rochester, if you know where Rochester is.
Yeah.
Oh, it's absolutely beautiful. Yes.
Oh, near the Mayo Clinic. Okay,
so yeah,
great.
other than the fact that winters we may freeze, and in the summers Minnesota is renowned for humidity and mosquitoes that will carry you away. We're looking forward to it.
Well, great. Well, it sounds like a great opportunity. And I heard about this morning, and I thought of this Frank Zappa song called Montana, where the lyric is that he's moving to Montana to raise me some dental floss. Anyway, we do have a token of our appreciation for you. So, it really has been a pleasure to serve with you, even though it's been short. But let's come forward and give you the certificate. Well, again, best of luck to you, and Minnesota is lucky to have you. So, items from Director of Planning and Development Services, Jenny Marsh.
So, Chairman Chernak and Commissioners, I know that Janelle was suggesting that perhaps we were going to get out of Planning Commission for a little longer, and she was not correct. So we will be having a meeting in December. I liked it. It was fun. It was a good, fun joke, but not so much. So we will have our normal December meeting. I think we have 2 or 3 items on that agenda. And so that's the third Wednesday. We'll be back to the 19th, unlike this month, which we purposely skipped because we didn't want to be here the night before Thanksgiving. And then also, I think one of the questions that brings up is where are we at with applications and kind of what does the cycle look like? Because Commissioner Haidt also asked me that when he came in. So I would say that overall applications from the development review perspective are down, I would say about 30%. And so when you look at what we were seeing through the system last year in terms of major applications and minor applications, we're actually a little bit flipped this year. We have more minor applications than major, which means those are administrative, so they're not always coming to the commission. And interestingly enough, when you look at the building permit side, which is also my purview, and we're up 30% on building permits, so we're kind of in one of those flip-flop cycles where a lot of the stuff that you guys saw a year ago, year and a half ago, has gone to final plat and now is to building permit. But I also would say we are down some applications, so it is not quite the busy agenda that we had there for some time, where we had 2 meetings a lot, and then we also added Envision, and then we added the code. So you guys have been a trooper for the other big picture things, which is really important to us too. And with the North Main Street plan, obviously, we'll be bringing back some more items to you. And then I also wanted to just say thanks to Chairman Chernak. Chairman Chernak joined us at our inaugural Citizens Planning Academy. So we conducted a 4-week planning academy where Erin, myself, Phil, Ben, and Dawn basically taught 4 weeks of planning from soup to nuts. What does state statute say? How did we get here? And Michael was kind enough to come in our 3rd session where we talked about the land development code and decision making specifically, and I think represented you all very well in explaining how you make decisions and how you weigh things. And so thank you for doing that, and we will call upon you again. We thought, we'll see if people want to apply, and we ended up getting 42 applicants for 15 spots, and folks really hung in all 4 weeks. And we will plan a little recognition of sorts for them at some point too. But it was actually really fun, and so we'll be doing it again in the spring, and we already obviously have a waiting list, so that's pretty exciting. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Jane, apparently I inverted part of the agenda. Commissioner Poland pointed it out to me. I accidentally skipped item 10, which is items from our council representative, Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair Shernick. Nice to see all your faces again after a good number of months now. As always, thank you for your service, and obviously a special thank you to Commissioner Tetzlaff. Good luck in your next endeavor. Congratulations on that, by the way. Hopefully, as much fear-mongering as goes on about some of our policy setting at the council level, hopefully we don't see an extreme drop-off in applications with our new IHO, Inclusionary Housing and Inclusionary Zoning Ordinance that's coming forward, as some members state in the community. So hopefully we won't completely kill the commission by instituting that. So anyway, thank you guys again for your service, and it was great to see you all tonight.
Thank you very much. Unless anybody's opposed, we will be adjourned. Thank you.